In the dead of night at 4:23 a.m., the only sounds on Saratoga Trail were the low hum of an air conditioner and the chirp of a motion sensor. It was too early for anyone to be awake, too late for anyone to be coming home. A single porch light cast long, eerie shadows across a driveway. Then a figure emerged. A security camera captured the grainy gray scene. A man stepping out of his house, glancing over his shoulder, and walking with an unnerving purpose to his truck. His breath was visible in the cool August air. He looked back at the house one last time, as if waiting for someone to stop him. No one did. 3 minutes later, the light went out, and the house disappeared into the darkness. No one watching that footage could have known that the man in the video was carrying the weight of an unspeakable crime. No one could imagine the nightmare that had just unfolded inside that home. And no one, not his neighbors, not his coworkers, not even the investigators who would soon descend on the property, could comprehend what he had already done, or what he was about to do next. The truth was there, hidden in plain sight, in the silence of a summer morning. A silence that was about to explode into one of the most shocking criminal investigations in modern American history. To the outside world, the Watts family looked like the American dream. Chris Watts, 33, was soft-spoken and athletic. Shanann Watts, 34, was vibrant, driven, and relentlessly optimistic. They had 2 beautiful daughters. 4-year-old Bella, who was shy and sweet, and 3-year-old Celeste, a little spark of energy and mischief. A third child, a boy, was on the way. Shanann documented their seemingly perfect life for the world to see. Her Facebook was filled with photos and videos of a smiling, happy family. Chris was almost always there, a gentle grin on his face, his arms wrapped around his daughters. Neighbors called them happy. Coworkers called them normal. Friends called them a beautiful family. But perfect images can hide dark shadows. And in the summer of 2018, shadows were gathering inside the Watts home. Chris and Shanann were drifting apart, even if they wouldn't admit it. Shanann felt the distance, the coldness. She wrote about it in her planner and texted her closest friends. She tried to talk to Chris, but he was distracted, evasive. He had started a transformation, working out obsessively, eating healthier, and buying new clothes. On the surface, it looked like self-improvement. But something else was fueling it. Shanann's friends later recalled her saying, "Something is off. He doesn't touch me anymore. He barely talks." The house that was once filled with laughter grew heavy with tension. But to the outside world, they were still the friendly family who waved from the driveway. No one saw the truth hiding just beneath the surface. Monday, August 13th, 2018. At 8:31 a.m., a text message to Shanann went unanswered. At 9 o'clock a.m., a second text went unread. By 10:10 a.m., her friend Nicole Atkinson was worried. Shanann had just returned from a business trip around 2 a.m. She was pregnant and had a doctor's appointment that morning. She was never late. She was never unreachable. Something was wrong. By 12:27 p.m., Nicole was on Shanann's porch, knocking and calling, but the house was eerily quiet. She called Chris at work and he told her Shanann must have taken the kids on a play date, but nothing added up. Within an hour, the police arrived. Officer Matthew James noticed Shanann's car was still in the garage, the children's car seats inside. Her purse and medications were on the counter. The house was empty and there was a strange absence of chaos. But what truly unsettled the officer was Chris's demeanor. He was calm, too calm. He seemed detached in a way that set off alarm bells. There were no signs of a break-in, no blood, no struggle. There was just a deep, unnerving feeling that something was terribly wrong. Detective Samuel Drake, a composite character representing the instincts of real investigators, was called to the scene that afternoon. Drake was in his early 40s with the quiet intensity of someone who'd seen too much. When he arrived at the Watts home, he felt it too. The air was heavy, unsettled. He immediately focused on Chris, who stood rigidly by the door, his gaze avoiding everyone's eyes. Drake didn't need a confession yet. He needed a reason. And he had a strong feeling the reason was standing right in front of him, breathing too evenly, speaking too softly, and showing far too little fear for a man whose pregnant wife and 2 children were missing. Drake had learned one thing over his career. When someone avoids panic, it's often because they already know the outcome. He leaned against the doorframe and watched Chris carefully. The real investigation had begun. Drake and Officer James conducted their first walkthrough of the house. It was immaculate, almost unnaturally so. Dishes were clean, counters were wiped, and no toys were scattered on the floor. For a home with two small children, it felt staged. In the master bedroom, Shanann's suitcase was neatly packed by the wall. Her phone was upstairs. Drake looked at the bed. It was made perfectly, too perfectly. The sheets were smooth, the blankets crisp. "Chris," Drake asked, "did you and Shanann argue last night?" Chris just shook his head. "No, we were just tired. We went to bed." But the bed told a different story. Normal sleep leaves wrinkled sheets and bunched blankets. As Drake walked downstairs, he noticed a faint, sweet smell in the air like laundry detergent mixed with something metallic. He filed it away. Something had been cleaned. Recently. Later that day, Chris went with police to a neighbor's house to review security footage. The camera had captured a part of his driveway. The neighbor, Nate, queued up the recording from the early morning. At 4:23 a.m., Chris appeared on screen, backing his truck into the driveway, something Nate had never seen him do before. As the video played, Chris started pacing, his hands nervously darting in and out of his pockets. The camera showed him making several trips between the garage and the truck, lifting something into the vehicle. The footage was grainy, but the movement itself was suspicious. Drake found himself watching Chris more than the video. Nate leaned in and muttered to Drake, "He's not normally like this. Something's different today." Chris pulled out his phone, trying to look busy. The fidgeting, the nervous energy. Drake had seen guilt look exactly like this many times before. Crime scene technicians arrived that night. Though there were no obvious signs of violence, they swept the house thoroughly. They found the sheets and comforter missing from the master bed. The refrigerator was unusually empty, and the trash had been taken out early. They discovered small, faint stains near baseboard and a disturbed patch of carpet near the bed. Individually, these things meant little. But together, they painted a chilling picture of someone trying to erase evidence. Standing in the loft and staring at the faint marks, Drake's jaw clenched. He knew that nothing speaks louder than the things a person tries to hide. The next day, Chris Watts stood in front of local news cameras, pleading for the safe return of his family. He looked directly into the camera, his voice soft and trembling. "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back." He described the emptiness of the house, the pain of not knowing where they were. To millions watching, he was a heartbroken husband and father, desperate for answers. But to the investigators watching him, the performance was unconvincing. His grief seemed hollow, his words rehearsed. While he spoke of love and despair, his body language told a different story, a story of detachment and control. Detective Drake knew they needed to apply pressure. He brought Chris in for a formal interview. Drake's strategy was simple. Build a rapport, express empathy, and give Chris a way to tell the truth without immediately branding himself a monster. He started with small talk, asking about his job, his workout routine, his relationship with Shanann. Chris answered calmly, painting a picture of a normal, happy marriage. But as the hours passed, Drake slowly tightened the net. He brought up the neighbor's security footage, the stripped bed, the weirdly clean house. With each new piece of evidence, a crack appeared in Chris's calm facade. He began to contradict himself, his story shifting and changing. Drake then introduced a new element, a polygraph test, a lie detector. He told Chris it was a standard procedure to help clear his name. Chris agreed, confident he could beat it. But the machine told a different story. The polygraph operator, a skilled interrogator from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, informed Chris that the results showed significant deception. He had failed, miserably. The operator looked him in the eye and said, "You know what happened? Your body is telling the truth even if your mouth isn't." At that moment, something in Chris broke. He asked to speak with his father, who was waiting at the station. In a private room, with the cameras still rolling, Chris's story finally changed. He confessed. But it wasn't the whole truth. It was a calculated, self-serving version. He claimed that after he told Shanann he wanted a separation, he saw her on the baby monitor strangling their daughters. In a fit of rage, he said he had killed Shanann. It was a horrific story designed to paint himself as a victim, a man who snapped while trying to protect his children. But the investigators didn't buy it. His story was full of holes. Why would he hide Shanann's body at his remote worksite? Why would he so calmly go about his day, pretending they were missing? The confession was just another lie, another attempt to control the narrative. The truth, when it finally came out, was far more monstrous. Chris Watts, the loving father and husband, had planned it all. He had smothered his two little girls, Bella and Celeste, before strangling his pregnant wife, Shanann. He then drove their bodies to a remote oil field, buried Shanann in a shallow grave, and dropped the bodies of his daughters into two separate oil tanks. His motive? A new life with a new woman unburdened by his family. The perfect image was shattered, revealing a void of chilling narcissism and brutality. The silent, ordinary man from the security camera footage was a monster hiding in plain sight. The case of the Watts family serves as a terrifying reminder that evil can wear the most familiar of faces, and that sometimes the most horrific secrets are hidden behind the brightest smiles. The next day, Chris Watts walked into a police station for a sit-down interview. He was wearing a North Carolina Tar Heels shirt, maybe an emotional play to seem familiar, innocent. He spoke softly, carefully, each word measured. "We were emotional," he admitted. "Shanann was upset about our relationship, but she was fine when I left for work. I don't know where she went." Detective Drake leaned back, tapping his pen. "And the kids?" he asked. Chris's eyes darted down, then back up. I didn't see them." I thought they were still asleep. It was that hesitation that struck Drake. Not grief, just a pause. He pressed gently. "Chris, is there anyone who would want to harm your family?" Chris shook his head. "No, no one." But his voice cracked, just enough for Drake to notice. A mental list started forming in the detective's mind. The failing marriage, financial struggles, the emotional detachment, that sudden obsession with working out, his movements in the early morning, and the inconsistent statements. People don't just evaporate. Families don't vanish without a trace. And fathers don't react like this. The very next day, investigators uncovered a critical truth. Chris was having an affair. A woman, we'll call her Lexi Cole, had been seeing him for several weeks. She had no idea Shanann was pregnant and claimed Chris had told her the marriage was already over. She cooperated completely. Drake interviewed her in a quiet room. Her voice trembled as she described Chris as gentle, kind, romantic. He'd promised her a future. He seemed unlike any man she'd ever met, soft-spoken, attentive, devoted. Drake had heard it all before. Often, the men capable of monstrous things wear a gentle disguise. When Lexi broke down crying, Drake knew she wasn't involved. But she was crucial. Because now they had a motive: freedom. Chris agreed to a polygraph test. In Drake's mind, it was the biggest mistake he could have made. The examiner told him gently, "You should be honest. The test will show if you're not." Chris just nodded, but he looked sick. Questions were asked, answers were given. When it was over, the examiner didn't sugarcoat it. "Chris, you failed. You didn't just fail a little. You failed every question." Chris stared, his face pale, his eyes empty. The mask was starting to crack. Drake stepped back into the room. "Chris," he said quietly, "we need the truth. Right now." Chris's facade faltered, but the truth he offered next was only a partial, manipulative lie. He claimed he'd killed Shanann in a fit of rage after seeing her hurting the girls. Drake knew instantly it was a lie, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the end. He didn't push Chris on the details about his children. That would only risk solidifying the lie. Instead, he leaned into something more powerful than pressure: silence. Calm, steady, unflinching silence. People break under silence, and Chris did. Minutes ticked by. He rubbed his face, his breathing quickened, his shoulders folded inward. He looked like a man drowning. And then the crack widened. He began to sob sharp, gasping sobs. It was the sound of a man whose world had either just collapsed or who could no longer contain what he'd done. Drake waited. Finally, Chris whispered, "I'll tell you. If I can talk to my dad first." They brought his father in. Chris sat there shaking. And in a single, fragmented sentence, a piece of the truth spilled out. "I did it. I killed her." It was only the first truth. The rest was still buried. Drake and several officers escorted Chris to the location where he claimed he'd taken the bodies, an oil site where he worked, miles outside of town. It was a desolate, windswept plain, a graveyard hidden in plain sight. Shanann's body was found in a shallow pit, but the bodies of his daughters, Bella and Cias, were found inside oil tanks. The hatches were small, the openings narrow. The darkness inside was unimaginable. Even seasoned officers had to turn away. Drake stood still for a long time, just staring at those tanks, his jaw locked tight. Even for someone who had seen the worst of humanity, this was different. This wasn't rage or an accident. This was cold, calculated, efficient. Drake knew then that the true story was far darker than anything Chris had confessed. Over the next few days, Drake's team reconstructed the final hours of the Watts family. They pieced together digital metadata, surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic findings. The horrifying truth began to emerge. Shanann had arrived home at 1:48 a.m. There was a confrontation, but it was quiet. Neighbors heard nothing. It was the sound of a marriage unraveling, of a man cornered by his own lies, and of a pregnant woman refusing to vanish quietly from his new life. In those silent, early hours, Chris made his decision. He murdered Shanann first. The children, still alive, still awake, still calling for their mother, were next. That realization cut Drake deeper than any case before. He sat in his dim office late at night, staring at the timeline. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't self-defense. This was a man methodically eliminating obstacles. Drake consulted with criminal psychologists who described men like Chris as family annihilators, a rare but chillingly consistent pattern. The traits included a desire to appear perfect, a deep fear of failure or exposure, a double life, narcissistic tendencies, and sudden personality shifts. But the most disturbing trait was that they often appear completely ordinary, loving, harmless, just like Chris. One psychologist told Drake, "These men don't snap. They shift." That word, shift, stuck with Drake. It described Chris perfectly: a slow erosion of empathy, a gradual slide into darkness, all hidden behind a polite smile. When confronted with the full weight of the evidence, Chris finally confessed to everything. Not the earlier lies, but the real, brutal truth. He confessed to killing Shanann after an argument. He confessed to killing Bella and Cease. He confessed to transporting their bodies and burying them. But there was no justification, no flicker of remorse. Only an eerie calmness, as if he were confessing to a speeding ticket, not a massacre. Drake watched him, seeing only a hollow shell. A man who had chosen a new life over his family and was now choosing calm acceptance over humanity. When the recording ended, Drake walked down the quiet hallway, feeling a weight he knew he couldn't shake. Some cases stay with you. This one would haunt him. In November 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent, without the possibility of parole. He accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. In court, he barely looked up as Shanann's family spoke through tears. Their words a tangled mess of pain, love, and loss. The entire room was heavy with grief. Drake sat in the back, silent. It was over. Officially, legally. But for him and for so many others, this case would never truly leave. Weeks after the sentencing, Detective Drake returned to the Watts home. It was empty, cold, stripped of all belongings. The rooms echoed with the shadows of the life that was once lived there. In the loft, he paused. That faint, metallic smell he'd noticed on the first day was gone now. The house had been professionally cleaned, sanitized, and prepared for auction. But the memory of that smell lingered. Tragedy has a way of clinging to places. He walked through each room slowly, imagining the moments that had unfolded. The laughter, the arguments, the bedtime stories, the quiet family dinners, the whispered fears. A family home, a sanctuary, turned into a crime scene. A sanctuary turned into a void. No amount of cleaning could ever erase what happened there. Some houses remembered. And this one, Drake believed, always would. Months passed. The seasons changed. The case was officially closed, but Drake couldn't let it go. He found himself replaying the details in his mind, late at night when the city was quiet. Chris's unnerving calmness. Shanann's growing desperation captured in her final text messages. The silent house, the perfectly made children's beds, the grainy early morning footage from the neighbor's camera. Sometimes he thought he could hear the whisper of the wind as it swept across that barren oil field. Sometimes he smelled the faint, sweet scent of laundry detergent in a hallway that no longer existed. And sometimes he saw Chris's expressionless face calm in a way that no innocent person could ever be. He carried the case with him like a ghost. It lived in the corners of his mind, untouched and undisturbed, like a sealed evidence box he could never bring himself to destroy. One late winter night, Drake reopened his old notebook from the case. It wasn't because he had unanswered questions or new leads. It was because he needed to understand something deeper, the mindset. The transformation, the exact moment Chris Watts crossed the invisible line between man and monster. He reviewed everything. The timelines, the phone logs, the body cam footage, the witness statements, the psychological assessments. And as he connected the dots, he realized something chilling. Chris hadn't snapped in a moment of uncontrollable rage. He had planned. It wasn't a meticulous, brilliant, or perfect plan, but it was deliberate. His behavior in the days leading up to the murders, deleting messages, emotionally distancing himself from his family, fixating on a future without them. It all painted the image of a man methodically preparing for an irreversible choice. The crime wasn't born of passion or rage. It was born of cold, twisted logic. It was logic twisted into pure horror. And Drake finally understood with a sickening clarity. The most unsettling truth of all, evil doesn't always arrive with thunder and force. Sometimes it just walks in quietly, wearing a familiar, gentle smile. The Watts murders were solved, legally concluded, and became a story known around the world. But closure? True, meaningful closure? That remained elusive. Shanann's family carried their immeasurable grief every single day. Neighbors on Saratoga Trail still whispered when they walked past the house. The investigators and first responders still remembered the images they wished they could forget. And Drake, he still saw the case in his dreams. But he found a small, fragile measure of peace in one simple truth. Shanann, Bella, Cius, and their unborn son, Nico, they were not forgotten. Their story had shaped him, changed him. Their voices, silenced far too soon, continued to echo in the chambers of his heart. And as for Chris, he would spend the rest of his life confined, stripped of the very freedom he destroyed others to obtain. Sometimes justice is imperfect, but it is something. Years later, the house at 2825 Saratoga Trail remained unsold. Its windows stayed dark, its driveway empty. Some nights, neighbors passing by swore they could hear footsteps inside, or the faint, ghostly echo of a child's giggle carried on the wind. Of course, they knew it was only memory, a collective, painful memory lingering in the air like a permanent chill. Detective Samuel Drake retired eventually, but he never truly left the case behind. Sometimes he would drive past the house, parking his car across the street, just watching the silent facade. He would sit there, staring at the porch where a concerned friend once knocked, desperately searching for answers. He'd look at the garage where a simple camera captured the terrible truth. He'd stare at the windows where no lights shone anymore, and he would whisper into the quiet of his car. I remember, because some stories are just too heavy to leave behind. Some tragedies are too deep to ever fade away, and some families are too precious to ever forget. The Watts case was one of them. It's a reminder carved into the very landscape of Frederick, Colorado, a reminder of the darkness a human heart can hide, of the absolute fragility of trust, and of the devastating silence that follows the unthinkable. And the house remained, still, empty, haunted, not by ghosts, but by the undeniable, echoing truth. A truth that will echo for generations to come. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into fascinating cases. Please like and subscribe for more content.